Ancient Greece, a land of myths and legends, a land of philosophers and warriors, but above all, a land of magnificent temples. These temples, they weren't just buildings, they were like the heart and soul of the ancient Greek world. Imagine now, white marble, shining under the Greek sun. These temples were homes to the mighty Greek gods and goddesses. They were places of worship where people came to offer prayers and sacrifices. Can you picture it? The smell of incense, the chanting of priests, the flickering oil lamps. It must have been quite a sight. The Greeks, they took their temples seriously, They believed that the gods themselves watched over these sacred places. So they put a lot of effort into making them as beautiful and impressive as possible. And boy, did they succeed. Even today, thousands of years later, the ruins of these temples still take our breath away. Now you might be wondering, how did these temples come to be? Well, it all started very simply. In the beginning, temples were small and humble structures, more like huts, really. They were made from wood and mud bricks, basic stuff. But as time went on, things started to change. The Greeks, they were getting better at building and they had more resources, so their temples became grander. They started using stone, especially marble, which gave the temples a bright, shining appearance. The design of the temples also evolved. They developed a distinct rectangular shape with a central room called the naos, where the statue of the god or goddess was housed. This room was often surrounded by rows of columns, which is a signature feature of Greek temples. By the classical period, Greek temples had reached their peak of sophistication. They were no longer simple structures. They were intricate works of art, showcasing the Greeks' mastery of geometry, proportion, and decoration. Now, let's talk about the different types of Greek temples, because, believe it or not, they weren't all the same. One way to classify them is by their plan, which basically refers to the arrangement of columns around the central room. There were in antis temples with columns just between the projecting walls of the naos. Then there were prostyle temples with columns only at the front. Amphiprostyle temples had columns both at the front and back, and then there were the grand peripteral temples, like the Parthenon, which were completely surrounded by a single row of columns. Fancy, huh? Temples could also be categorized based on their function. Some, like the Parthenon, were dedicated to major deities and were the focal points of religious festivals. Others, known as treasuries, were smaller and used to store offerings and valuable objects. Speaking of the Parthenon, let's take a closer look at this iconic temple. Perched atop the Acropolis in Athens, the Parthenon is like the poster child of Greek architecture. Dedicated to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the city's patron, it was built in the 5th century BCE during the Golden Age of Athens. The Parthenon is a prime example of a peripteral temple with its imposing Doric columns. But what makes it truly special is the attention to detail. The Greeks, they were masters of optical illusions. They knew that perfectly straight lines can sometimes appear curved to the human eye. So they cleverly incorporated subtle curves into the Parthenon's design. For example, the columns bulge slightly in the middle, a technique called entasis, which makes them appear perfectly straight. And the platform on which the temple stands is also slightly curved upwards. These subtle adjustments create an illusion of perfect harmony and balance. It's these little details, that make all the difference.